From the splendor of Versailles to the squalor of a prison cell, the story of Marie Antoinette.
This is really the story of a woman who has to grow up very fast. And the more awful life gets for her, the more steely she is.
Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France. Next.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The accused may be seated. Your name, age, position, place of birth.
My name is Marie Antoinette of Lorraine and Austria. Age, almost 38. Widow of the King of France. Born in Vienna.
A year after the revolution swept her from her throne, Marie Antoinette stood on trial for her life, accused of crimes against the French Republic and appalling sexual practices as well. She was nearing 38, but she appeared far older than her years. There remained barely a trace of the lovely, carefree Austrian princess who became the French queen while she was still a teenager. One admirer said, "Surely never lighted on this orb a more delightful vision." Renowned for her charm and grace, she devoted herself to the pursuit of pleasure, never troubling to ask who was paying for the luxuries she took for granted.
She's so dazzling, she's so full of charisma that the debate about Marie Antoinette was, is she a cutie pie or is she a monster? Is she a virgin or is she a whore? Is she a dimwit or is she a, desperado, Machiavellian desperado?
Elle a été un bouc émissaire. Marie-Antoinette n'a jamais dit « s'ils n'ont pas de pain, qu'ils mangent de la brioche ». C'est purement imaginaire. Marie-Antoinette ignorait tout de la condition du peuple.
Elle est emportée par l'histoire, sans comprendre ce qui arrive. Elle vit l'histoire comme une tragédienne.
She was an ordinary human being in extraordinary circumstances. Her destiny was to be married to the King of France at a most crucial moment in France's history, and to be blamed for a great many of the ills, but out of it she did forge a completely different character.
Tribulation first makes you realize who you are.
Marie Antoinette grew up at the Habsburg court in Vienna. Born to a life of unimaginable wealth and unquestioned privilege. Austria was a great empire spread across the center of Europe, and her mother was its ruler. The Empress Maria Theresa was renowned for her iron will and her formidable armies. She would have led her soldiers into battle herself, she once said, if she hadn't been perpetually pregnant.
imagine having 16 children. She would read the state papers throughout the labour, dropping them when things got to a critical stage. Strong, coped with adversity, but she was the mother from hell.
On November 2nd, 1755, the Empress gave birth to her 15th child, Maria Antonia Josepha Joanna. Everyone called her Antoine. Coddled and pampered, Marie Antoinette always remembered her childhood fondly, the youngest girl in a great brood of children.
Marie Antoinette was light-hearted, enjoying music, dancing, all those kind of things. Very affectionate, but not a very deep character. Maria Theresa neglected her, thinking she was never going to come to very much. She thought Marie Antoinette was rather sweet, but uninteresting.
She learned to play the harpsichord and dance, and how to comport herself at court, but not much more. She hated reading, had difficulty writing, showed no interest in geography or history. She is more intelligent than has been generally supposed, one of her tutors said. Unfortunately, she has not been trained to concentrate in any way, though I feel that it is well within her power to do so. While her mother ruled, her father occupied a purely ceremonial position. He delighted in being alone with his family in their private apartments, where court etiquette could be forgotten. His death when Marie Antoinette was 9 dealt the Empress a devastating blow. For the rest of her life, Maria Theresa wore widow's black. Her grave demeanor grew graver still, inspiring in her children respect and fear. Marie Antoinette quickly learned that her first duty was to Austria.
L'impératrice Marie-Thérèse est avant tout une femme chef d'État. Et comme c'est une femme chef d'État, elle gouverne tout. L'impératrice se conduit avec sa fille toujours en chef d'État, plus qu'en mère affectionnée.
The Empress used her daughters as pawns in a game of high-stakes diplomacy, building alliances by marrying them to the rulers of Europe. They are born, she said, to obey. When she wanted to cement a precarious alliance with France, Austria's centuries-old antagonist, she commanded Marie Antoinette to marry the heir to the French throne.
At that time, France and Austria were enemies, and the marriage between Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI was an attempt to erase that past.
On April 21st, 1770, Marie Antoinette said goodbye to Austria forever. She was just 14 as she set out to conquer the French court, armed only with her charms and the instructions of her mother.
Farewell, my dearest child. A great distance will separate us. Do so much good to the French people that they can say that I have sent them an angel.
Two weeks later, on an uninhabited island in the middle of the Rhine, Marie Antoinette was handed over to France in a solemn, allegorical ritual. While French and Austrian courtiers looked on, the princess removed all her Austrian-made garments. Nothing of her Austrian childhood would be left to her, not so much as a sentimental brooch or a favorite ring. She was to be French now. apparelled in the finest French jewels, silks, and petticoats. At stake was a tenuous political alliance and the peace of Europe itself. Saying goodbye to her Austrian attendants, the teenager burst into tears.
C'est une jeune personne innocente qui s'en va pour épouser en fait le plus beau parti d'Europe. On lui a décrit la cour de Versailles comme une véritable féerie. Elle va être extrêmement déçue. Elle ne sait pas du tout ce qui l'attend.
Marie Antoinette married Louis Auguste de Bourbon on May 16, 1770, in the royal chapel of the storied palace of Versailles. As the heir to the French throne slipped a golden ring on his bride's fourth finger, one observer noted that his hands were trembling. Like his bride, Louis was also a teenager, just 15. Shy, introverted, the future Louis XVI appeared to have neither the disposition nor the resolve to rule.
Louis n'est pas du tout le prince charmant qu'elle avait pu imaginer. Et pour aggraver encore la situation, qu'on l'a élevé dans l'horreur de l'alliance avec l'Autriche, et tout ce qui touche à cette alliance lui déplaît. Elle rencontre un garçon qui ne connaît pas les femmes et tout ce qui touche au sexe lui fait peur. Il n'a pas du tout envie de se marier. Il va falloir toucher cette jeune fille, il va falloir coucher avec elle, et c'est absolument au-dessus de ses forces. Et plus elle est charmante, plus elle lui fait peur.
The ceremony over, the royal family signed the marriage contract. When it was the bride's turn, she scrawled her name awkwardly across the page, leaving beside it a large, unsightly blob of ink. That evening, after a banquet supper, the two teenagers were led by the king himself to the bridal chamber. The groom on his left, the bride on his right, the courtiers trailing behind. The marriage bed was a very public place, and the court was entitled to know what went on there.
La sexualité n'est pas une affaire privée, personnelle, comme on pourrait le penser chez nous, mais une affaire publique. Dans les systèmes dynastiques, il faut absolument qu'il y ait des enfants pour succéder, pour garantir la stabilité politique. Elle doit donner des enfants à la France, au futur Louis XVI. Ça, c'est la mission qui est assignée à toutes les épouses royales.
The bed was blessed. The king handed the royal nightgown to his grandson. The bride was handed hers. Midnight tolled. The teenagers lay down beside one another. The king bowed down and kissed them both. The court withdrew. The royal couple was alone.
Then they are face to face and they don't know each other. And they are in complete panic. They have no idea what to do.
The next morning, the new bride looked out her windows at the splendor that was Versailles. Versailles was a monument to the glory of France and the absolute power of the king. Marie Antoinette was all at once thrust center stage, while a court, notorious for its endless stream of gossip and treacherous intrigues, took her measure. She was determined to please, and at first her youth and innocence won her many admirers. She beamed with freshness, her lady-in-waiting wrote. Her walk partook at once of the dignity of the Habsburgs and the grace of the French. Here at Versailles, Marie Antoinette expected to spend the rest of her life.
Royals didn't have much sense of the larger world in their countries. Their lives were incredibly restricted geographically. Do you know Marie Antoinette never saw the sea in her whole lifetime?
Marie Antoinette never saw the real France, and never wanted to. Insulated from the bleak lives of the peasants in the countryside and the workers in the city, she lived in a kind of fantasy world, cut off from the life of France itself. Untroubled by the inequality and injustice that had been, for centuries, at the very heart of French society. Marie Antoinette stood at the pinnacle of an aristocratic hierarchy, an unreflecting child of a privileged class. Her role was to bear an heir to the throne. But something was wrong in the bedroom, and all Versailles was talking. Nothing, Louis wrote in his private diary. Nothing had happened that first night, or the night after, or the one after that. In spite of Marie Antoinette's evident attractions, young Louis fell asleep.
Il ne s'est rien passé, et on savait qu'il ne se passait rien. De quelle façon? C'était très simple. Le roi était averti, c'était une affaire d'État.
The king himself has told me, wrote an Austrian prince, that the young heir has barely been attentive to her, and that the first nights passed without any interesting event. The old king was not worried about his grandson. He must, he said, be let be. But Maria Theresa, who was fully informed, badgered her daughter with advice.
I cannot repeat it enough. Never be bad-tempered about it. Use caresses, cajolings, but without too much urgency. That would spoil everything.
In spite of the problems in the marriage bed, the young princess quickly won the favor of the old king. Her delight in music was just one of her charms. Louis XV was enchanted with her, her first lady wrote. All his conversation was about her grace and vivacity.
C'est une jeune femme qui est très séduisante, très gaie aussi. D'un côté, elle est appréciée, notamment par sa grâce, par sa beauté. Mais d'un autre côté, elle est immédiatement attaquée. Parce qu'elle est autrichienne, hein, simplement.
From the beginning, she was like the emblem of hostility. And I don't think she was aware of that, but I'm sure she could feel, she could sense that hostility.
A hostage to politics, a failure in the marriage bed. The Austrian teenager was homesick, as she struggled to adjust to the elaborate rituals of the French court.
Madame, my very dear mother, I have not received one of your dear letters without having the tears come to my eyes. I still ardently wish I could see my dear and very dear family for at least a moment.
One of Marie Antoinette's surprises when she arrived in Versailles was that there was not one single time in her life where she could be alone. And it started from the first moment when she opened her eyes in the morning. It was like an open stage. And I think that that constant pressure was very difficult to live with.
They call on me in my chamber. Anyone can come, as long as they belong to the court. I put on my rouge and wash my hands in front of everyone.
La tradition en France veut que la reine ait une vie totalement publique. Marie-Antoinette a l'habitude de faire un petit peu ce qu'elle veut, puis elle a, il faut le dire, elle a envie de jouer. C'est une jeune princesse d'une quinzaine d'années, elle veut jouer, et l'étiquette de cour est extrêmement rigide.
She doesn't want to listen to les tantes, her aunts, who define royal ceremony at Versailles. She collects a group of, you know, chuckly sort of high school valley girl friends around her, really, who say, yes, don't listen to the, you know, boring old crones.
The teenager refused to take the tedious court rituals seriously, mocked those who did, and provoked her mother to dispatch one admonishing letter after another by courier from Vienna.
Do not let yourself go to making fun of others. At your age, the world forgives many frivolities and childish acts. But as time passes, you yourself will suffer from them.
You must trust me very little to believe that I am so unreasonable as to amuse myself and neglect those I must honor.
Do try to get your head stocked with good reading. You need it more than almost anyone.
My greatest happiness consists in pleasing you. I'm so desperately sorry that you believe what people tell you.
Making people like us is a talent which you have mastered so perfectly. Do not lose it by neglecting your kind heart, your frankness, your amiability. You owe it neither to your beauty, which in fact is not so great, nor to your talents or culture. You know very well you have neither.
Maria Theresa knew every detail of her daughter's behavior, from reports from Marie Antoinette's confidential advisor, the Austrian diplomat Count Mercy. Marie Antoinette never imagined that her trusted counselor was also her mother's spy. Mercy's network of informants even included the princess's own servants, who brought him news of everything. News from the royal bedroom was not good. Months after their wedding night, the young couple still had not consummated their marriage. "I find my wife charming," Louis told the king. "I love her, but I still need a little time to overcome my timidity." A year later, nothing had happened. 2 years went by. 3, 4, still nothing.
Incredible to think about it. He had some extraordinary sexual problem. And I think in the end it was psychological, but many people have thought there was a physical problem. And he absolutely declined to consummate the marriage.
Tongues at court were wagging. If Louis couldn't fulfill his duties in bed, the gossips wondered, could he fulfill his duties when he became king? On May 10th, 1774, all eyes at the palace were focused on a single candle burning in a courtyard window. Louis XV lay dying from smallpox. On the king's death, the candle would be extinguished. Forbidden to visit the sick man for fear of infection, the young heirs to the throne waited as the candle flickered in the night air and was snuffed out. Marie Antoinette and her husband threw themselves on their knees and prayed. "O God, guide us, protect us," they cried. "We are too young to reign." In the great cathedral at Reims on June 11, 1775, while 19-year-old Marie Antoinette looked on, her 20-year-old husband was crowned King Louis XVI. The bells rang out the news. The people rejoiced. Sunshine set the stained glass windows aglow.
Ces jeunes gens incarnent un avenir qui est radieux. Ils jouissent d'une popularité extraordinaire. Ce sont des flots d'amour qui montent vers ce jeune couple.
The French people seemed to adore their new queen. Only the queen's mother was filled with foreboding.
I am greatly distressed. My daughter's fate will either be wholly splendid or extremely unfortunate. There is nothing to calm my apprehensions. She is so young, has never had any power of application, nor ever will have.
As Louis became king, rioters were taking to the streets of Paris, demanding cheap bread. Times were hard. A disastrous harvest had brought soaring prices for grain. The country was in debt. The people hoped their new king would make things better.
It's a very bad time at that particular moment. But the real problem for France is actually, it's saddled with an incredibly antiquated set of governing institutions. And to actually make them work, you need a genius king. Louis XVI seems to be a nice, decent, quite bright, very conscientious person who never really wanted to be king.
The king mainly wanted to be alone, and for him the court and the life of the court was painful, was always an effort. Being a king wasn't pleasurable for him.
Louis XVI was his wife's polar opposite. He was ponderous, awkward, irresolute. She was emotional, graceful, quick to make up her mind. He loved to read. She rarely opened a book. He had a royal passion for hunting, but he lacked majesty and authority. There is nothing haughty or regal in his bearing, a courtier observed. He gives the appearance of a peasant waddling along behind his plow. All eyes turn toward the queen. She is grace itself when she moves, wrote one observer. They say she does not dance in time, but if so, it is certainly the time which is at fault.
Marie Antoinette and her husband lived two different lives. He was mainly a man of the day, and he would go to bed early and get up early. And Marie Antoinette loved the night.
The king was devoted to his wife and let her have her own way. Now that she was queen, she threw herself into a hectic round of pleasure.
My tastes do not accord with the king's. He is only interested in hunting and in metalworking. I should not look particularly well standing beside a forge.
While her husband was sleeping, she was relishing the pleasures of Paris. The opera, the theater, the masked balls. She gambled recklessly, piling up debts that her husband quietly paid. She spent freely on luxurious dresses and wore her hair piled 3 feet high, adorning it with feathers and ribbons in the outlandish fashion of the day.
It is really like someone who's come from a sort of Austrian backwater and has suddenly, whoa, sort of walked onto Madison Avenue, you know, really. There is no place where the dresses are more gorgeous. She's a kid, you know, she's got a credit card with no limit, really.
Maria Theresa was made aware of everything and dispatched from Vienna a barrage of stinging criticism.
I have news that you have been buying bracelets, and that you have thrown your finances into disorder, and have heaped up a burden of debt. It is well to be in the fashion, but a good-looking queen endowed with charm, simplicity of attire, is more suitable to exalted rank. A queen only degrades herself. Do not forfeit the good name you acquired to begin with. I, who love my little queen and watch her every footstep, cannot hesitate to warn her of her frivolousness.
Her mother is constantly saying, you know, my airhead daughter, the shopaholic, you know, stop it. You know, there are riots going on. You can't sort of, you know, really diamondomania must stop now.
What does my mother want? I'm terrified of being bored. I must have some distraction. I can find it only in increased amusements.
Once, with a sad and thoughtful look, the Queen confided to Count Mercy that her situation as a married woman was distressing.
I think she felt desperate. She wasn't having any kind of physical fulfillment at all. She could go dancing, she loved gambling, and it was easy to turn to inanimate objects, to have jewels and beautiful dresses. I think she compensated.
By now, tongues were wagging not only at Versailles, but all over France. Everyone asks himself beneath his breath, one bit of doggerel proclaimed, can the king do it, or can't he? The wretched queen despairs of it. Some say he cannot get it up, others that he cannot get it in.
There were insinuations that she could not have children with her husband because she would not sleep with him. She would sleep with other men. It's not true, but Marie Antoinette did not care. And she just found it was not very funny. She had no sense at all of how serious it was.
Elle a voulu faire de sa sexualité une chose privée. Et ça, c'est quelque chose que les courtisans n'ont pas du tout voulu entendre, n'ont pas voulu comprendre. Et je pense qu'une bonne partie des attaques vient de cela. Forcément, si la reine veut garder sa sexualité dans un domaine privé, c'est qu'elle a quelque chose à cacher. C'est qu'il y a un secret. C'est qu'elle a des amants. C'est qu'elle ne contente pas le roi. C'est que les enfants qui vont naître ne sont pas ceux du roi.
In 1777, Versailles welcomed a royal guest, the Queen's older brother, Joseph II of Austria. With the fate of France and the alliance with Austria entwined with two young people and their problems in the bedroom, Maria Theresa sent her son to help them. Joseph thought his sister was a pretty featherhead, and as they walked through the splendid gardens, he urged her to mend her ways. He criticized her towering hairdos and heedless pursuit of pleasure, but he was also captivated by her sincerity and charm. "She is an amiable and refined woman," he wrote his brother, "not quite grown up yet, little inclined to take careful thought, but with insight which has often surprised me. She has, however, a strong leaning towards pleasure." Joseph and Louis got on well, so well that the king confided the humiliating details of his conjugal failure. Louis admitted that he embraced the queen in the name of duty only. "Imagine," Joseph wrote his brother, "in his marriage bed, this is the secret. He has strong, perfectly satisfactory erections. He introduces the member, stays there without moving for about 2 minutes, withdraws without ejaculating but still erect, and begs good night. It's incredible because he sometimes has nighttime emissions. It is only when he is actually inside and going at it that it never happens. Oh, if only I could have been there. I could have seen to it. The King of France would have been whipped, so that he would have ejaculated out of sheer rage, like a donkey." Joseph's visit lasted 2 months. As he said goodbye, he handed his sister a document that ran 30 pages, filled with advice and warnings. "You are getting older," he wrote, "and you no longer have the excuse of youth. What will become of you? An unhappy woman, and still more unhappy princess." Marie Antoinette was 21 years old. Two months later, whatever Joseph's advice to the King of France had been, it seems to have worked like a kind of miracle tonic.
August 30th, 1777. My dear mother, I am in the most essential happiness of my entire life. It has already been more than 8 days since my marriage has been perfectly consummated. The proof has been repeated yesterday even more completely than the first time. I do not think that I am pregnant yet, but at least have the hope of being so from one moment to the next.
It had taken more than 7 years, but the great work, as Joseph called it, had been accomplished. 16 months later, all of France celebrated. There were free sausages and bread for the poor. The public drinking fountains were filled with wine. Marie Antoinette had done her duty to France and Austria, even though the baby was a girl. She named her Maria Theresa Charlotte, after her mother. Maria Theresa rejoiced, but she would not live to see her daughter give birth to 3 more children, 2 boys and another girl. The Empress of Austria died 3 years later on November 29, 1780.
Crushed by most dreadful misfortune, I cannot stop crying. Oh, my brother, now only you are left to me, in a country which will always be dear to me. Remember, we are friends, allies. Love me.
With the death of her mother, increasingly Marie Antoinette retreated from the life of the palace. She was devoted to her children, even deviated from court practice by taking part in their education. She was finding satisfactions in a private world of her own creation, transforming a 17th century summer villa on the grounds of Versailles into a little jewel of a palace called the Petit Trianon.
C'est un domaine qui appartiendra uniquement à la reine et où elle sera chez elle. Elle disait, lorsque je suis à Trianon, je suis moi, je ne suis plus la reine.
The Petit Trianon was a whimsical world of rustic fantasy, fashioned at the Queen's command. Her designers built ponds and stocked them with fish, channeled streams to meander through meadows, even created a rural village peopled with milkmaids milking cows, cheesemakers making cheese, and shepherds leading sheep to pasture by ribbons of blue silk tied around their necks.
Marie-Antoinette répondait au rêve écologique de son temps. C'était le retour à la nature. La campagne était à la mode.
She abandoned her elaborate court dress and took to wearing wide-brimmed straw hats and white muslin gowns. She fished, gathered flowers, and acted in amateur theatricals, in which she chose to play the roles of shepherdesses and dairymaids.
It's all about nature. The N word is on everybody's lips. It's all about flowers and muslin and going picnicking. She makes sure there are fresh eggs on the table for breakfast. She thinks, yes, there is a kind of little child in me, and the art of living well is to sustain the innocence of that childlike quality. It's very ironic, since a lot of her life is going to be spent defending herself against charges of corruption, pollution, wickedness, malice, deceit, and so on.
Even the king appeared to enjoy Petit Trianon, although he could only go when his wife invited him. The queen had another secret admirer, the emissary of the King of Sweden, Count Axel Fersen. He was one of the handsomest men I ever saw, one courtier wrote, though with an icy countenance, which women do not disdain if they can hope to give it animation.
Le comte Fersen est tout le contraire de Louis XVI. Il est grand, il est beau, et il a l'air d'un héros de roman. Alors la pauvre Marie-Antoinette, elle est tombée follement amoureuse de lui, et il y a une liaison compliquée, mystérieuse entre eux, car on ne saura jamais, sans doute, s'ils ont été ou non amants.
Marie Antoinette delighted in the Petit Trianon and spent as much time as she could there. But a queen was not meant to have a private life.
Petit Trianon a fait beaucoup jaser parce qu'on se demandait ce qui pouvait bien se passer, puisqu'on ne pouvait pas avoir la reine parce qu'elle était chez elle.
On l'accuse de faire des choses tout à fait réprouvées par la morale publique, d'avoir une sexualité débridée et de ne pas jouer son rôle d'épouse et de mère.
As Marie Antoinette flouted court etiquette and poured money into her whimsical hideaway, rumor spread and resentment grew, at a time when France was rife with discontent. The Petit Trianon gradually came to represent all the Queen's excesses and everything that was going wrong with France. Beyond the palace walls, the people were restless. Taxes were crushing. More and more peasants were losing their land. Increasingly, the people held the government responsible. Louis was powerless to help them. With France already deep in debt, he had drained the French treasury even further by supporting the American Revolution in order to weaken England, providing most of the colonists' guns and nearly all of their gunpowder. But it was the Queen who caught most of the blame. Her extravagance was becoming a ready explanation for the chronic financial crisis and the persistent discontent.
Certains courtisans avaient dit qu'avec l'argent qu'on avait dépensé pour construire le Trianon, on aurait pu améliorer la condition de vie d'un certain nombre de paysans qui étaient pauvres réellement.
The Queen remained blithely aloof and unaware. She continued to indulge her extravagant fantasies, while the French people were crying out for bread. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian, would soon acquire a new name, Madame Deficit.
C'est qu'elle n'a pas fait attention à ce que l'on pouvait dire d'elle. C'est qu'elle a voulu mener sa vie comme elle l'entendait, sans faire attention à ces élémentaires, les devoirs qu'on attendait d'une reine. Est devenue si rapidement un objet de haine.
The growing hatred of the Queen now took the form of underground cartoons, crude, vicious, increasingly obscene. They found an eager audience. The royal censor seemed powerless to stop them.
There's a huge smuggling industry of semi-legal or totally illegal pamphlet literature coming out of Holland, coming out of London, coming out of Switzerland. A group of extremely unscrupulous, kind of scandalmonger journalists decide they can really make a fortune by slagging her off, as we would say in the British Isles. These guys found an absolutely electrical connection between sex and politics, and are sold like hotcakes.
Marie-Antoinette first did not react at all to the pamphlets. She had seen some of them, but she thought she could ignore them. They came from the vast world outside of Versailles, which means nothing for her. She was blind to what was changing in France.
The sheer volume of underground pamphlets made it impossible for the government to control the poisonous attacks. Try and stop these vicious things by whatever means you can, the king told his police. But there was nothing to be done. The unimpeded flow of licentious engravings was creating a new, scurrilous image of the Queen, which would have a decisive impact on events to come. By 1785, the Queen's image had grown so tarnished that no one believed her when she became the innocent victim of an outrageous swindle by a group of thieves with connections to Versailles. An elaborate diamond necklace was the prize.
Les joailliers de la couronne avaient constitué un collier de 2842 carats et avec des pierres d'une eau extraordinaire. Estimé aujourd'hui, disons que ça ferait 7 millions d'euros. Et ils ont essayé de le vendre dans toutes les cours d'Europe. Personne n'en voulait, c'était trop cher, ce bijou fabuleux.
They offered the necklace to the Queen, but tempting as it was, the price was too steep. She refused to buy it. Now, without the knowledge of the Queen or the jewelers, the swindlers made their first move. They concocted an elaborate scheme to lure a gullible clergyman into advancing money to buy the necklace for her. The most important clergyman in France, His Eminence, the Cardinal de Rohan. Ambitious, fatuous, the Cardinal was the dupe at the swindle's center.
Too rich, too stupid, too vain. A tiny brain the size of a flea.
The Queen detested him, rarely deigned to glance his way. But when the swindlers told him she wanted to meet in secret in the park at Versailles, he believed them. He would do anything to win her favor. That night, a woman dressed in white glided out of a grove of dark pines. Blinded by his desire to prove his devotion, the Cardinal was convinced it was the Queen herself. He never knew that the woman behind the broad-brimmed hat was a prostitute.
Maybe he's in love with her, maybe he's not. But he wants to be in her good graces.
The Cardinal bowed and kissed the hem of the prostitute's dress. "You may now hope," she said mysteriously, "that the past will be forgotten." Then, fearing she would be found out, she fled. That was all. But it was enough to make the Cardinal rapturous, convinced that he was now a favorite of the Queen. The swindle had begun.
It was such a, a kind of, a cock-up, as we say in Britain, of such massive, mind-blowing proportions that words and thoughts fail us.
The swindlers told the Cardinal that the Queen would be forever in his debt if he would buy the necklace for her. She would, they assured him, return his money later.
We think, how could he have possibly been taken in? We have to remember that he was desperate to get into the Queen's good graces, and when he was told this is what she'd like you to buy the necklace and then she'll pay you back, it fitted in with what he wanted to hear.
The Cardinal bought the necklace and turned it over to the swindlers, who promised to deliver it to the Queen. It never reached her. The thieves made off with the diamonds, leaving the Cardinal with nowhere to turn when the money came due. When the web of lies finally came unstrung, the Queen was outraged. The King summoned the Cardinal to Versailles' splendid Hall of Mirrors, gave the orders for his arrest, and put him on trial, accused of conspiring to steal the necklace. The judges deliberated for 16 hours. The Cardinal belonged to one of the greatest noble families in France. He was innocent, the judges ruled, without a stain upon his character. The Queen could not hide her sorrow. Although she was innocent, poisonous rumors had denounced her as the guilty party, who had coveted the necklace and had urged the Cardinal to buy it for her. She wrote a friend,
"Come and weep with me. The judgment that has just been pronounced is an atrocious insult. I am bathed in tears of grief and despair."
This is really the story of a woman who has to grow up very fast, and she does so in fits and starts. There are various moments in her career where there is an incredible sobering up and wising up, and the aftermath of the affaire du collier, the diamond necklace affair, is one of those moments.
Marie Antoinette had been blameless, but the verdict was a ringing denunciation of her way of life.
I think the diamond necklace affair was made possible because Marie Antoinette was already seen as somebody who would do anything to get a new diamond. It's because Marie Antoinette was seen as a frivolous woman that the necklace affair could exist. The diamond necklace affair was a turning point for Marie Antoinette. She was condemned at that time, and she was condemned forever.
Marie Antoinette was becoming the most hated woman in France. The humiliating affair of the necklace fired the pens of scandal-mongering journalists, eager to satisfy the lascivious fantasies of a public convinced that the Queen would do anything to gratify her perverse desires.
Tout est imaginable et tout va être imaginé par les pamphlétaires. L'homosexualité de la reine, sa manière d'aller chercher le plaisir chez d'innombrables amants. La reine est non seulement celle qui ne satisfait pas son mari, mais qui en même temps est prise de fureur utérine. C'est un peu le terme consacré par un pamphlet contre la reine Marie-Antoinette. Ces images sont absolument désastreuses pour l'image de la reine. L'image caractéristique du couple royal, c'est donc le roi Louis XVI qui n'arrive pas à avoir une érection. L'attaque d'impuissance contre le roi est aussi une attaque politique, puisque être impuissant pour un roi, c'est non seulement une attaque sur le corps du roi, mais c'est aussi une attaque sur la volonté politique. L'impuissance de Louis XVI, c'est aussi l'homme qui ne fait rien, l'homme qui ne sait pas prendre une décision, l'homme qui hésite. Un roi qui est incapable de gouverner sa femme est évidemment incapable de gouverner le pays.
While the pamphlets were linking sexual failure with political inadequacy, the king was beset by unremitting financial problems, which neither he nor his advisors could solve. France was nearly bankrupt, and the Austrian queen, Madame Deficit, continued to absorb the blame.
What do they want of me? What harm have I done them?
The chorus of lies and hatred in the popular press grew more and more strident, assailing the Queen as the cause of France's trouble by coupling sexual degeneration with moral and political corruption.
Marie Antoinette became the scapegoat. Everything which was going wrong, and there were many things, it was her fault. It was her responsibility. But it's all a question about images. It's a game with images. This new powerful thing, public opinion, was really beginning and was making a new world. She had no idea that something like that could exist.
La reine n'a pas bien compris qu'on est dans une guerre d'images. Et c'est sur ce terrain-là, la reine est absolument perdante.
Gradually, the Queen became aware that she would have to respond to the torrent of savage attacks. In 1787, she commissioned a portrait of herself surrounded by her children, grouped together to suggest the Holy Family. She wore a pair of simple earrings, leaving her neck bare, without a necklace.
This is a classic example of damage containment. And you feel she understands the gravity of the situation.
At last, the Queen recognized the danger and put her frivolity behind her. She fired her private dressmaker, removed the gambling tables from her drawing rooms, cut back on personal expenses of every kind.
La reine change. La reine s'intéresse moins à sa vie de plaisir et se consacre beaucoup plus à la vie politique.
The authority of the king was crumbling. While Louis and his ministers talked of financial reforms, the people were hungry.
This is economically one of the very worst years. There's been another terrible winter. People are really hungry, you know, it's a catastrophic situation, really.
The king was in despair. He was hunting, one observer reported, to excess and indulging in immoderate meals. That spring, he was seen each day in the Queen's apartments, weeping.
He did not respond well under pressure, and in 1787 he really had what we would call a nervous breakdown. Marie Antoinette realized, for the sake of her son's future, her children's future, for the sake of the monarchy in which she believed, she'd been brought up to believe in it, she had to be the strong one.
The Queen began attending meetings of the King's Council. Her Majesty now seems entirely occupied with discussions of economies and reforms, a foreign ambassador wrote. But all these affairs are treated without any method or prearranged plan, and the result is a confusion which aggravates the evil instead of lessening it.
C'est une femme qui est totalement dépourvue de culture politique, qui n'a aucune expérience, qui connaît mal l'histoire de la France, qui ne connaît pas les réalités de ce pays. Et elle s'aliénait un certain nombre de personnes à la cour qui voyaient qu'elle défendait plus les intérêts de l'Autriche que les intérêts de la France. On avait l'impression qu'elle se conduisait beaucoup plus en archiduchesse autrichienne que comme une reine de France.
In 1789, with some of France's most powerful nobles agitating for reform, the king reluctantly convened the Estates General for the first time in more than a century. The Estates General was a form of parliament dating back to medieval times, representing the three estates, the nobility, the clergy, and the common people.
What fatal news. I dread it. These gentlemen wish to restrain the power of the king, but they will bring on their own destruction.
Neither Marie Antoinette nor her husband could imagine sharing power.
Elle a sa conception du pouvoir royal qui doit être absolu et immuable. Le roi et la reine ont été absolument atterrés parce qu'ils ne voulaient pas qu'il y ait partage entre des élus et un pouvoir exécutif qui était celui du roi.
Just as the king and the queen should be concentrating on how to work some kind of future with the politicians, their eldest son, the Dauphin, Louis-Joseph, the beloved, started to die very painfully of tubercular fever, which meant he became all twisted, he suffered.
2 years before, the Queen had lost her baby girl. Now, while she sat helplessly at her son's bedside, the 7-year-old boy died. Overcome with grief, the Queen was deeply wounded by the response of her subjects.
At the death of my poor little prince, the nation hardly seemed to notice.
The King and Queen had little time to mourn their son. The deputies to the Third Estate had declared themselves a national assembly. They were intent on providing a constitution for France and abolishing aristocratic privileges. The Queen called the National Assembly a pack of madmen.
France is absolutely alive with politicians who are trying to bring into being a constitutional monarchy. Politician after politician are producing schemes and trying their fervent best to make sure that the King and Queen are on board, and on board genuinely. The King and the Queen have a real decision to make, and they have no playbook. Is it better to limit the damage to the sovereign authority of the traditional absolute monarchy in France by accepting a role of a constitutional monarch? The king is in two minds, the queen is in one mind. She and her circle are essentially committed to a coup d'etat against the National Assembly. And that is the Rubicon, really. I mean, she persuades the king, or certainly if the king had been wobbling about it, she, puts backbone into him to move troops in huge numbers between Versailles and Paris. And it's this sort of sense that really Paris itself is about to be subject to a military occupation. The National Assembly is about to be liquidated. That creates the atmosphere for July the 14th.
On July 14th, 1789, the rituals of everyday life in Versailles marked the hours just as they always had. Paris was only 10 miles away, but the king and queen did not know that an angry mob was storming through the city streets, that the much-hated prison fortress in the heart of the city called the Bastille had fallen. Versailles was calm. At 10, the king went to bed, as was his habit, and by the strict dictates of decorum, he was not to be awakened until the next day. But at 2 in the morning, he was suddenly thrust from sleep by the Grand Master of the Wardrobe. "The Bastille has been taken," the king was told. "The governor has been assassinated. His head is being borne on a pike through the town." "Is it a revolt?" the king asked. "No, sire," came the reply. "It is a revolution."
In Versailles, nobody could believe it. It was such a shock. It was a complete panic. Within few days, everything collapsed. Most of the people around the king and the queen left. And Marie Antoinette wanted to leave. She wanted to escape.
The queen urged the king to flee to a provincial capital near the Austrian border. But when the king refused, she resolved to remain by his side. The queen wrote to a friend,
"I am shaken by this succession of blows. We are surrounded by hardships and misfortunes, but you may be sure that adversity has not lessened my strength or my courage."
Within weeks, the social order that had endured for centuries fractured. Aristocrats and clergy were stripped of centuries-old feudal privileges. The press was declared free, serfdom abolished, the rights of man proclaimed. With the royal censors gone, a flood of still more hateful pamphlets further blackened the Queen's reputation.
La Révolution fait payer à Marie-Antoinette ses prises de position contre-révolutionnaires, et elle fait payer d'une certaine manière cette grande peur qu'il y a eu de la prise du pouvoir par une femme. Cette idée qu'une sorte de volonté de pouvoir chez Marie-Antoinette qui serait non moins qu'une volonté de pouvoir politique, de gouverner à la place de son mari. Il y a une grande peur de la pouvoir de la femme chez Marie-Antoinette.
There was a very ugly streak of misogyny going on too, feeding into this mad demonology about dangerously meddling, sexually voracious women.
Some pamphlets are really astonishing. It's like open dreams. It's a world of dark fantasy, full of hatred. And there is a link, a sort of red thread, which goes from the first attacks against the Queen to the end.
The king and queen were at the mercy of events which had moved beyond their control. Less than 3 months after the fall of the Bastille, a mob led by thousands of women marched toward Versailles demanding bread. The queen was wandering in her garden at the Petit Trianon. The king had chosen to go hunting once again. Armed with broom handles, old pistols, pitchforks, and kitchen knives, the women surged forward, cursing the queen. "I should like to open her belly with a knife and tear out her heart," cried one. And another, "I shall have a thigh." And yet another, "I shall have the entrails." Early the next morning, the mob broke into the palace, killed 2 of the royal bodyguards, and forced open the door to the queen's bedroom. Just moments before, the queen had fled through a secret passageway to the safety of her husband's rooms. In a fury, the mob, screaming for the death of the queen, drove their pikes through her bed.
To violate the privacy and the sanctity of the queen's own boudoir, it's like being raped. It is absolutely like being raped. Nothing prepares the king and queen for the physical invasion of the palace. The fate of the polity and the physical, personal fate of her own family have become one.
The king and queen were prisoners of the mob. That afternoon, the royal family was forced to leave the palace. As the gates swung shut behind them, they turned and looked at Versailles for the last time.
We are lost, dragged away, perhaps to death. When kings become prisoners, they are very near it.
The royal family was taken to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where they were placed under heavy guard, captive in everything but name.
La reine avait manqué d'être assassinée et c'est une femme qui est complètement fragilisée et qui réagit de façon un peu hystérique au moindre choc. Marie-Antoinette, à partir de ce moment-là, va vivre dans l'angoisse et dans la peur physique. Mais ça ne l'empêche pas de faire preuve de courage.
She's getting tougher by the day. She's personally very brave. I mean, she's crying out, but you and I would be, I'd be crying. And the more awful life gets for her, the more steely she is.
The queen began to work on large pieces of tapestry, her lady-in-waiting wrote. Her mind too much occupied with surrounding dangers. The needle was the only employment which could divert her. The sole topic of her discourse was the revolution. She sought to discover the real opinions the Parisians had of her, and how she could have so completely lost the affections of the people.
Her political savvy, her political acumen, her political determination grows exponentially with the catastrophic nature of the decisions being taken. The more she's between a rock and a hard place, the more determined she is now to be a queen. All those years, when she could have been a queen, she was the airhead in the pretty dress, taking it on the chin unfairly for all these, scandals and absurdities. When she decides to become a queen, she decides to be the wrong kind of queen, really. And boy, does she go for it.
With the king sunk into a profound torpor, the queen committed herself to a desperate struggle against the revolution. She took secret counsel with ambassadors and advisors, even learning to read and write in code to communicate with allies in other countries. The king, one of the revolutionaries said, has only one man on whom he can depend: his wife.
She was decisive where he was indecisive. She was courageous when he was vacillating. She wasn't educated. She found it very difficult to write long letters. Nevertheless, she stayed up all night writing letters to her brother in Austria, writing letters to people, trying to hold the show together. Her whole character begins to deepen. She felt a deep melancholy, an agony about what might happen. Suffering taught her. She began to understand what sort of person she really was.
For most of her life, Marie Antoinette had wasted her energies on parties and balls, the races and gambling tables. Now, 34 years old, she contemplated her tragic destiny.
As far as we are personally concerned, happiness is over and done with, whatever the course of events may be. If only what we are now suffering could be counted on to make our children happy. Tribulation first makes you realize who you are.
In her darkest hours, Marie Antoinette turned for comfort to her old friend, Axel Fersen, who secretly visited the palace in spite of the danger to himself. "She is extremely unhappy, but very brave," Fersen wrote. "I try to console her as best I can. I live only to serve her." Fersen feared for the Queen's life. There seemed to be only one hope: escape. Late on the night of June 20th, 1791, what appeared to be an ordinary family slipped into a hackney cab not far from the Tuileries Palace. Closer inspection would have meant disaster for the little group. The royal family was in flight. The king had been paralyzed by indecision. The Queen masterminded the escape herself.
Our position is horrible. I have trusted in time and in the hope that public opinion may change. But today, everything is different. If we would escape destruction, we must take the only path open to us. If we must perish, let us do so gloriously.
Driving the cab was Axel Fersen, who helped plan the escape.
As long as he was in charge, there was skill. But the king told him to go away because Count Fersen was a foreigner, and he didn't want people to think a foreigner had helped them get away.
At first, the scheme went smoothly enough. Once outside Paris, the family switched coaches and drivers and headed toward the Austrian border, where loyal troops were waiting for them. Backed by the Austrian Empire, the king and queen were prepared to retake France from the revolutionaries by force. But first, they would have to travel nearly 200 miles without being recognized, and they were moving too slowly, making themselves too conspicuous. The king and queen traveled the only way they knew how, in a brand new carriage, a luxury vehicle with racks for the king's favorite wines and built-in compartments for the royal robes and the king's crown. There was a silver dinner service, a clothes press, and a chamber pot with a leather cover. The escape was destined to fail, doomed by royal etiquette.
A king just cannot fly away. It's difficult to imagine how strong, how powerful the etiquette was. It was like a magic circle around these people, and they could not get out.
After more than 22 hours on the road, they were at last approaching Austria. Just 40 miles and they would be across the border. When they were spotted by a former cavalryman. They were apprehended in a little town called Varennes, seized by citizens loyal to the revolution, and forced to return to Paris. For nearly 4 days, they traveled at a walking pace, with their once loyal subjects jeering and insulting them all along the way. The mystique of the inviolable monarch had shattered beyond repair.
What a king was, and what a queen was someone whose body you were not proximate to. You couldn't scream at them, you couldn't spit at them, you couldn't wave pikes under their face. You know, what kind of king and queen could there possibly be to whom that would be allowed to happen?
L'effet de Varennes est un événement qui accentue encore la crise du couple royal dans l'opinion. Dès lors, l'image du roi partout dans les pamphlets, dans les caricatures, c'est celle du cochon. C'est celle du roi porc, du roi cochon. Le cochon étant un animal coupé, impuissant, castré, et aussi l'animal qui ne pense qu'à manger. Pour la reine, elle qui a le rôle moteur dans le couple, elle réussit à convaincre son mari qui était très hésitant, et donc cela contribue à l'image contre-révolutionnaire de Marie-Antoinette. Et l'image aussi de l'étrangère, puisque la fuite, c'était quoi? C'était pour rejoindre les armées étrangères.
La reine devient une femme qui est avide du sang du peuple. Vous voyez, il y a cette espèce de crescendo et il faut que la reine soit considérée comme un monstre.
The Queen bore the blame for the aborted escape. Marie Antoinette was so despised, the English ambassador reported, that if she had walked out on the streets of Paris, she would have been torn to pieces. With the King and Queen back in the Tuileries Palace under much heavier guard, on September 19, 1791, crowds of Parisians turned out to celebrate a new constitution. France was now a constitutional monarchy, with the power of the king severely restricted. Marie Antoinette privately thought the Constitution was monstrous, a tissue of absurdities. But she swallowed her pride and urged the king to accept it.
It is impossible for the king to refuse his consent. What good can there be in exposing oneself to certain and needless peril?
The perils were everywhere. The revolution was far from over. The attempted escape had given ammunition to the revolutionaries who wanted to abolish the monarchy, to be rid of king and queen altogether. At the same time, war fever was growing. Many revolutionaries were clamoring to protect the new government by attacking its enemies and spreading the ideals of the revolution abroad. Their target? France's longtime rival, the country where Marie Antoinette had been born, Austria. In spite of the risks, the Queen clung to the hope that war would bring her former countrymen to her rescue.
The Queen wants a war. She feels herself to be a prisoner, she's scared. She's determined to bring on the soldiers to get her out of this nightmare.
In the spring of 1792, the king declared war on Austria, then fell into a despondent state, a court attendant wrote, which amounted almost to physical helplessness. He passed 10 successive days without uttering a single word, even in the bosom of his family.
He fears to give orders, but the king is not a coward. He has great passive courage. He is crushed by an over-tender conscience. As for myself, I would like to act, on horseback if necessary. But if I acted so, it would give weapons to the king's enemies. The outcry against the Austrian woman, against the domination of a female, would be general in France. In showing myself, I would destroy the king.
At the end of April, French soldiers headed into battle in the name of universal liberty. Austrian troops struck back, forcing the French to retreat. The war would last for 23 years and leave 1.5 million Frenchmen dead. The Queen was on the side of France's enemies. From her rooms in the Tuileries Palace, she wrote letter after letter to her nephew, the Emperor of Austria, sending detailed accounts of French military plans whenever she could lay her hands on them.
Every time she learns anything about the disposition of French troops, she dials 1-800 Vienna, you know. It actually goes straight to the enemy. Whoa, excuse me, you know, serious gamble. Her role is not complicated from now on. She wants France to be defeated.
Il y avait bien sûr trahison de sa part. Il s'agissait avant tout de sauver la monarchie, quoi qu'il dût en coûter.
Amidst the furies of war and revolution, Marie Antoinette turned for solace to her children.
If I could be happy, I should be made happy by these two little beings. My children are my sole resource, and I have them with me as much as possible.
She watched over her 7-year-old son anxiously, writing to his governess,
Our affection for him must not lack an element of severity. We must not forget that we are bringing him up to be a king.
With war fueling a violent patriotic fervor, the radicals who wanted to put an end to the monarchy began taking control of the revolution. On June 20th, a mob invaded the palace and forced onto the king's head the red cap of independence.
The king was forced to drink the health of the revolution. They have lost all scraps and shreds of their royal dignity.
The end of the monarchy itself was at hand. Less than 3 months later, an armed mob, 20,000 strong, stormed the palace. The king and queen had little choice but to submit. As they were led out of the palace, Louis was heard to say, "The leaves are falling early this year." On September 21st, 1792, the King and Queen of France became nothing more than ordinary citizens of the new French Republic. The monarchy, which had endured for nearly 1,000 years, was no more. Marie Antoinette had always been terrified by the medieval tower in the middle of Paris, a gloomy fortress called the Temple, with narrow windows and an inner courtyard that never saw the sun. 3 days after they were taken from the palace, she and her family were imprisoned there.
They were kept in strict confinement, no court, just the parents teaching the children. It became a sort of little bourgeois household for a few months.
They were provided with rooms refurbished to make them more comfortable. A generous supply of food catered by a staff of 13, and a library for the king. There was even a harpsichord, so that Marie Antoinette could give lessons to her daughter.
C'est une vie en point de suspension, avec des promenades au pied de la tour du Temple, où le petit dauphin jouait au ballon. La reine faisait de la broderie, faisait de la couture, faisait du tricot. Le roi et la reine, le soir, jouaient eux-mêmes au billard.
Everything is about family now. The one thing that they always accuse her of not being a good mother, a good wife, a sort of bourgeoise, kind of decent person, she now overwhelmingly is.
In August 1792, a guillotine was erected in the center of Paris, a new, humane form of execution. The mechanism falls like thunder, its inventor Dr. Guillotin reported. The head flies off, blood spurts. The man is no more. In their rooms in the tower, the royal family, the king and queen, their 2 children, and the king's sister, quietly waited, while fear was rising all around them. The fledgling French Republic was fighting for its life. Prussia had allied itself with Austria and invaded France, routing French armies. French peasants who opposed the revolution threatened civil war. The military crisis in the countryside provoked a violent reaction in the capital. On August 21st, 1792, the guillotine began meting out justice to France's suspected enemies. A week later, the royal family was disturbed by cries outside the prison walls. A mob was on the rampage, invading the city's prisons.
A great many of their royalist friends were massacred in the most horrible way, in a kind of bloodbath. Marie Antoinette's favorite, the Princesse de Lamballe, was dragged out of her cell, executed, and her hair was then dressed by a barber, her beautiful hair. Her head was put on a pike and it was dangled outside the window of Marie Antoinette at the Temple.
The crowd demanded that the Queen kiss her friend's pale lips. Frozen with horror, Marie Antoinette fainted. 3 months later, the king was charged with treason and put on trial.
The king is tried and he's sentenced to death. He's allowed to say goodbye to his wife and children, a terribly painful scene. He pretends he'll see them in the morning in order to get rid of them because he wants to pray. And do you know what he does? He eats a large dinner and sleeps a good night's sleep. Isn't that odd?
I commend my children to my wife, the king wrote in his will. I beg her to forgive me all the evil she is suffering for my sake, and the grief I may have caused her during the course of our marriage. At 10:30 in the morning, January 21st, 1793, the sound of rolling drums announced to the Queen that her husband was dead. After more than 20 years of marriage, they had grown truly fond of one another. All that remained to her now were her 2 children, and she clung to them with all the desperation of a mother's love. Her 8-year-old son had become, for those who still believed in the monarchy, the King of France, Louis XVII. When she was presented with a plan to escape alone, she refused to consider leaving him behind.
The interests of my son are the only guide I have. And whatever happiness I could achieve by being free of this place, I cannot consent to separate myself from him.
"5 months after her husband's execution, with no warning, her son was taken from her and imprisoned in another part of the tower.
The next cruel step on the pilgrimage was taking away the little boy. She could hear him crying all night in a different part of the tower from her. The poor little boy was filled with drink and beaten. It was appalling abuse.
Forbidden to visit her child, Marie Antoinette would stand for hours in front of the narrow window slits in her cell, hoping to glimpse him in the courtyard. Sometimes, she would hear him singing songs of the Revolution, which his jailer made him learn. One month later, Marie Antoinette was herself removed from her cell and imprisoned in a fortress along the River Seine. The Conciergerie, a medieval relic, dark, damp, with thick walls and windows barred with iron. The former queen, who had spent her life in splendid palaces with countless rooms, was now confined to a single squalid cell.
Elle est enfermée dans une chambre qui est pratiquement sans jour. Il n'y a qu'une petite fenêtre. Et le concierge arrondit ses fins de mois en faisant payer des gens pour voir la dernière reine de France.
She was 37, a shadow of her former self, hardly a threat to anyone. But from the moment she entered the Conciergerie, her life was forfeit. "I have promised the head of Antoinette," a revolutionary leader warned. "I will go and cut it off myself if there is any delay in giving it to me." All of Europe was aligning itself against France. Britain and Spain had joined Austria and Prussia. And in France itself, civil war was now spreading, threatening to tear the new republic apart. With fear the order of the day, a new revolutionary tribunal had been formed to prosecute enemies of the state. Marie Antoinette was ripe for sacrifice.
Nobody expected the revolutionaries to kill Marie Antoinette. Why kill a queen consort? Marie Antoinette was deliberately targeted in order to bind the French together in a kind of blood bond.
The trial began on October 14th, 1793. The indictment was riddled with language that seemed to draw directly on the pamphlets and popular press. She was a scourge and a bloodsucker, it read, given to intrigues of every kind, disordered pleasures, excessive squandering, perfidious views.
It was a show trial. She was only allowed to meet her own advocate the night before, and he wasn't allowed to do anything for her anyway. They'd already decided to kill her, but she didn't know that.
Never for one moment have you ceased wanting to destroy liberty. You wanted to regain the throne at any price, over the bodies of patriots.
We had no need to remount the throne. We were already on it.
What interest do you attach to the aims of the Republic?
The happiness of France is what I desire above all things.
Do you think that kings are necessary to ensure the happiness of nations?
An individual cannot decide such a question.
You surely regret that your son has lost a throne on which he might have been seated had it not been for the uprising of the people.
I shall never regret anything for my son, as long as my country is happy.
She did extremely well. She was so intelligent at the trial, it really demonstrates how far she had come. Can you imagine the 14-year-old Marie Antoinette being able to score off these advocates?
On trial for her life, there seemed to be only one charge Marie Antoinette had to fear: treason.
Since the revolution, you have never for a moment ceased intriguing with foreign powers against liberty.
Since the revolution, I personally have forbidden myself all correspondence abroad.
Il n'y avait aucune pièce prouvant sa trahison. On a trouvé dans les archives un certain nombre de lettres de la reine qui prouvent réellement sa trahison. Mais à l'époque, on ne le savait absolument pas.
Witness followed witness, 41 in all, giving testimony that had little bearing on the case. Her intrigues with foreign powers were not the real issue. Her reputation was.
She is immoral in every way. So perverted and so familiar with every crime that, forgetting her position as a mother and the line drawn by the laws of nature, she did not recoil from indulging with her son in indecencies the mere idea and mention of which arouse a shudder of horror.
They laid the most disgusting charge against her. It was so gross, and it was intended to be gross. They wanted to smirch her reputation as a mother, which was very important to her, and the idea of the mother of France was very important to the country.
From a declaration that the boy made, it was revealed that these two women often made him lie down between them. That there then took place acts of the most uncontrolled debauchery. That there was no doubt, from what her son said, that there had been an act of incest between the mother and son.
Marie Antoinette and her sister-in-law were accused of molesting the Queen's son. But there was no substance to the charge. The only evidence, the testimony of the little boy, a terrified 8-year-old torn from the arms of his mother and threatened and abused by his jailers.
It's as though someone would prosecute the president, let's say in an impeachment case, and would take really as a basic script the National Enquirer.
Son procès est la synthèse de ce qu'il y a dans les pamphlets à ce moment-là depuis presque une dizaine d'années. C'est-à-dire le rôle à la fois politique et sexuel de la reine. C'est ça qui est l'aboutissement de l'image publique de la reine.
As the prosecutor's words reverberated across a courtroom, suddenly grown deathly quiet, Marie Antoinette sat in stony silence, until a juror asked her why she did not respond to the charge.
If I have made no reply, it is because nature refuses to answer such a charge brought against her mother. I appeal in this matter to all the mothers present in the court.
A wave of sympathy rippled through the room. Some of the women cried out to stop the trial. The prosecutor pressed the incest charge no further. In the court record, it was noted that the accused appeared deeply moved. The trial went on for 2 days and a night. When the verdict came, it was 4 in the morning. Marie Antoinette was sentenced to be executed at noon that same day. Throughout the trial, she had demonstrated a calm intelligence and fierce will. Now, with only hours to live, Marie Antoinette prepared for her final ordeal. Weak and exhausted, she summoned her remaining strength to write her sister-in-law.
October 16th, 4:30 in the morning. I have just been condemned to death, but not to a shameful one, since this death is shameful only to criminals. I am calm, as people are, whose conscience is clear. I know how much my little boy must have made you suffer. Forgive him, my dear sister. Remember how young he is, and how easy it is to make a child say whatever one wants, to put words he does not understand into his mouth. I send you my heartfelt love, and also to my poor, dear children. How heartbreaking it is to leave them forever. Adieu. Adieu.
The letter ends abruptly. It was never sent. As the tumbril made its way across Paris, the horses walked slowly. Marie Antoinette, one revolutionary said, should drink long of death. 30,000 soldiers stood guard. Mobs lined the streets, hurling insults. The whore, one newspaper reported, was audacious and insolent to the very end.
Her dignity was so great that when she was taken in this rough cart, no carriage for her, to the place of execution, the newspapers dared not write afterwards that she'd been cowardly, that she'd shrieked and cried, as they liked writing about aristocrats. They had to say that she'd been dignified. So they said it was the pride of a habitual criminal.
Il y a un crayon de David qui montre une très vieille femme que l'on conduit à la guillotine avec un courage extraordinaire et une dignité incroyable.
She showed no sign of fear. Some people achieve miracles of decent self-control and composure.
At that moment, which must be an incredible moment of panic, she still reflects perfect form. She climbed the stairs to the guillotine very lightly, without a pause. A sort of natural heroism. She did die as a queen.
It was noon. With the blade suspended above her, Marie Antoinette moved forward and accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot.
Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose.
Marie Antoinette's severed head was held high before a screaming crowd. She was buried in an unmarked grave.
Ce qui la place véritablement dans la légende, c'est cette mort affreuse. Il y a mythe parce que c'était une femme frivole qui s'est transformée bien malgré elle et parce que sa vie s'est achevée par une abominable tragédie.
She's gone on a very long journey through hell and back. And with each defeat and each disaster, behave with transcendent courage. But as a queen, she is a catastrophe because she makes a constitutional monarchy impossible. A relatively peaceful transition from an old world of an absolute monarchy to a new world of a constitutional monarchy is screwed. That door is closed. All of our own natural, humane response to her being someone who behaves with a growing sense of tragic intelligence does not compensate. It's a tragedy for France, but it's also, in a Greek sense, of tragedy being no way out, of playing out your destiny. It is indeed deeply a personal tragedy.
It's a story which goes between two extremes. She was a girl whose destiny is the happiest possible destiny. All she wanted and all she created was made from flowers and sounds. It's a vanishing kingdom. By the end, everything she had is taken away from her. Everything and everybody she loved.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
From the splendor of Versailles to the squalor of a prison cell, the story of Marie Antoinette.
This is really the story of a woman who has to grow up very fast. And the more awful life gets for her, the more steely she is.
Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France. Next.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The accused may be seated. Your name, age, position, place of birth.
My name is Marie Antoinette of Lorraine and Austria. Age, almost 38. Widow of the King of France. Born in Vienna.
A year after the revolution swept her from her throne, Marie Antoinette stood on trial for her life, accused of crimes against the French Republic and appalling sexual practices as well. She was nearing 38, but she appeared far older than her years. There remained barely a trace of the lovely, carefree Austrian princess who became the French queen while she was still a teenager. One admirer said, "Surely never lighted on this orb a more delightful vision." Renowned for her charm and grace, she devoted herself to the pursuit of pleasure, never troubling to ask who was paying for the luxuries she took for granted.
She's so dazzling, she's so full of charisma that the debate about Marie Antoinette was, you know...
And the marriage between Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI was an attempt to erase that past.
On April 21st, 1770, Marie Antoinette said goodbye to Austria forever. She was just 14 as she set out to conquer the French court, armed only with her charms and the instructions of her mother.
Farewell, my dearest child. A great distance will separate us. Do so much good to the French people that they can say that I have sent them an angel.
Two weeks later, on an uninhabited island in the middle of the Rhine, Marie Antoinette was handed over to France in a solemn, allegorical ritual. While French and Austrian courtiers looked on, the princess removed all her Austrian-made garments. Nothing of her Austrian childhood would be left to her, not so much as a sentimental brooch or a favorite ring. She was to be French now, appareled in the finest French jewels, silks, and petticoats. At stake was a tenuous political alliance and the peace of Europe itself. Saying goodbye to her Austrian attendants, the teenager burst into tears.
C'est une jeune personne innocente qui s'en va pour épouser en fait le plus beau parti d'Europe. On lui a décrit la cour de Versailles comme une véritable féerie. Elle va être extrêmement déçue. Elle ne sait pas du tout ce qui l'attend.
Marie Antoinette married Louis Auguste de Bourbon on May 16, 1770, in the royal chapel of the storied palace of Versailles. As the heir to the French throne slipped a golden ring on his bride's fourth finger, one observer noted that his hands were trembling. Like his bride, Louis was also a teenager, just 15. Shy, introverted, the future Louis XVI appeared to have neither the disposition nor the resolve to rule.
Louis n'est pas du tout le prince charmant qu'elle avait pu imaginer. Et pour aggraver encore la situation, qu'on l'a élevé dans l'horreur de l'alliance avec l'Autriche, et tout ce qui touche à cette alliance lui déplaît. Elle rencontre un garçon qui ne connaît pas les femmes et tout ce qui touche au sexe lui fait peur. Il n'a pas du tout envie de se marier. Il va falloir toucher cette jeune fille, il va falloir coucher avec elle et c'est absolument au-dessus de ses forces. Et plus elle est charmante, plus elle lui fait peur.
The ceremony over, the royal family signed the marriage contract. When it was the bride's turn, she scrawled her name awkwardly across the page, leaving beside it a large, unsightly blob of ink. That evening, after a banquet supper, the two teenagers were led by the king himself to the bridal chamber. The groom on his left, the bride on his right, the courtiers trailing behind. The marriage bed was a very public place, and the court was entitled to know what went on there.
La sexualité n'est pas une affaire privée, personnelle, comme on pourrait le penser chez nous, mais une affaire publique. Dans les systèmes dynastiques, il faut absolument...
Is she a cutie pie or is she a monster? You know, is she a virgin or is she a whore? Is she a dimwit or is she a, desperado, Machiavellian desperado?
Elle a été un bouc émissaire. Marie-Antoinette n'a jamais dit « S'ils n'ont pas de pain, qu'ils mangent de la brioche ». C'est purement imaginaire. Marie-Antoinette ignorait tout de la condition du peuple.
Elle est emportée par l'histoire, sans comprendre ce qui arrive. Elle vit l'histoire comme une tragédienne.
She was an ordinary human being in extraordinary circumstances. Her destiny was to be married to the King of France at a most crucial moment in France's history, and to be blamed for a great many of the ills, but out of it she did forge a completely different character.
Tribulation first makes you realize who you are.
Antoinette grew up at the Habsburg court in Vienna. Born to a life of unimaginable wealth and unquestioned privilege. Austria was a great empire spread across the center of Europe, and her mother was its ruler. The Empress Maria Theresa was renowned for her iron will and her formidable armies. She would have led her soldiers into battle herself, she once said, if she hadn't been perpetually pregnant.
Imagine having 16 children. She would read the state papers throughout the labor, dropping them when things got to a critical stage. Strong, coped with adversity, but she was the mother from hell.
On November 2nd, 1755, the Empress gave birth to her 15th child, Maria Antonia Josepha Joanna. Everyone called her Antoine. Coddled and pampered, Marie Antoinette always remembered her childhood fondly, the youngest girl in a great brood of children.
Marie Antoinette was light-hearted, enjoying music, dancing, all those kind of things. Very affectionate, but not a very deep character. Maria Theresa neglected her, thinking she was never going to come to very much. She thought Marie Antoinette was rather sweet, but uninteresting.
She learned to play the harpsichord and dance, and how to comport herself at court, but not much more. She hated reading, had difficulty writing, showed no interest in geography or history. She is more intelligent than has been generally supposed, one of her tutors said. Unfortunately, she has not been trained to concentrate in any way, though I feel that it is well within her power to do so. While her mother ruled, her father occupied a purely ceremonial position. He delighted in being alone with his family in their private apartments, where court etiquette could be forgotten. His death when Marie Antoinette was 9 dealt the Empress a devastating blow. For the rest of her life, Maria Theresa wore widow's black. Her grave demeanor grew graver still, inspiring in her children respect and fear. Marie Antoinette quickly learned that her first duty was to Austria.
L'impératrice Marie-Thérèse est avant tout une femme chef d'État. Et comme c'est une femme chef d'État, elle gouverne tout. L'impératrice se conduit avec sa fille toujours en chef d'État, plus qu'en mère affectionnée.
The Empress used her daughters as pawns in a game of high-stakes diplomacy, building alliances by marrying them to the rulers of Europe. They are born, she said, to obey. When she wanted to cement a precarious alliance with France, Austria's centuries-old antagonist, she commanded Marie Antoinette to marry the heir to the French throne.
At that time, France and Austria were enemies.